recording so that it looks a little bit better. So now it's working. I think I just needed to force reboot Karma using that restart render. But yeah, so I was able to get these optics latest NVIDIA drivers installed. So now I'm getting a lot faster viewport or render performance with optics rendering or GPU stuff rendering enabled. So we're going to be looking into some shader development, surface shader development, not really particle shading, but I just wanted to show you here a sense for the speed with depth of field. I was turning up some of these diffuse bounces. Maybe we go up to 99. See what happens. But yeah, it's definitely super snappy, super quick. And it's a lot faster than when I was just doing it with the CPU enabled last time. So if we switch back to the regular one, the normal boy, you should get a sense for the difference in speed. So just in terms of all that noise, how slow it is to resolve, and it's just gotten to like 1-2% now. And then if we go back to the XPU, it's already instantly kind of killed a lot of that noise. It's already at 9, 10, 11% and all that. So XPU definitely working now fully to its full potential. And we'll start to move forward. And I'm just going to do pause that render. So if you do have multiple Houdini sessions open and you're going to be doing GPU rendering or something on both, just make sure that you're not churning things in the background at all times. So yeah, I'll get going here. I'm just going to make a geometry node and go inside and do the file. And then I'm going to grab, we kind of touched on this last time, in your HFS, which is the Houdini file system or install directory, you can go into Houdini MaterialX resources, geometry, and then there's a Shaderball there. I just like this one a little bit better than the standard Houdini one. If you look at other MaterialX samples, and they even have an online viewer. Oof. Somewhere they have it. They might have hidden it. Arnold Photo. Bonjour. So I'm not sure where it was. I could try to find a link to it. Here it is. So basically, if we're using similar geometry, we should be able to more like closely or reliably test things. So here we have similar HDRIs, similar geometry, and you could do like a glass shader. I think my GPU is getting worked overtime right now, but you get an idea here with what's going on. So this MaterialX online thing is a pretty cool thing. You can even open up these controls and play around with other properties and like dial settings in or change stuff in real time. Like these are just the standard material shader settings. So if you wanted to play around with other shader settings or just do stuff right in the web browser, it's pretty cool. And then this comes with some groups, sort of calibration mesh and preview mesh. Wallaby. Yes, of course. Hopefully you find it helpful. So yeah, this is going to be pretty MaterialX heavy. So I figured why not just grab some stuff from this MaterialX. Comes with Houdini, so any Houdini session you open, you'll be able to link to this file for sure. And it comes with these groups, and I think we're all set with this. If we just maybe call this the Shaderball MaterialX, we could go back to the USD context, the stage context, and just grab a SOP import. Extra nodes, how's it going? P-scale transitions. You're talking about using width and P-scale at the same damn time, or just using it as a transition technique. So I'm just going to grab that object and I think under import data, maybe these subset groups. I'm going to pull up a thing here so we can better visualize it, but that's what we're looking for, is that groups submenu. MaterialX is same as USD. It's not exactly the same. I think that I linked it earlier in the chat, but this little thing here gives you a good overview. Basically, USD can hold any shader. You could have Redshift specific shaders inside of USD. You could have Karma specific shaders inside of USD. You can do kind of even like the mantra style, like some Vex, I think, things in the Karma shaders, but it won't be supported by XPU. So USD is just very robust, and then USD is kind of even more advanced than FBX or ABC. It's a whole render scene description. So camera information, camera shutter, rotations of cameras, multiple lights, all of that stuff. That these are just kind of meant for model caches or point deformation caches. FBX is a little bit more advanced because you can do like skeletal deformations and weight painting and things like that. But USD is mainly for exchanging with other renders and everything like that. So if we go into the Solaris scene graph tree, Solaris you can think of as USD. In Houdini, it just means the same thing basically. Solaris is like their implementation of USD, which is the open source standard. And if we look here, we just have the SOP import, and then we have one mesh. So we're basically, when we view the scene graph panel here, we're always seeing the information that the renderer will have access to. So even if we save this USD file out and give it to someone using Maya, these would be the selections or the meshes that they basically have the ability to shade. And then if I start working with these drop downs, do calibration mesh, then you can see that this gets a kind of subcomponent, or geometry subset is the actual type name of that primitive. So it's a subset of the mesh, or in Houdini we usually call it groups. And then we can get a preview mesh as well. And I don't know what the easiest way would be to highlight these, but we could basically just shade these differently. So one thing I'll do, USD from C0 textures. We could try it. yeah, there's some different areas and things like that that this stuff exists at. But yeah, just if we're just trying to get started with dropping a shader on everything. Are these in a specific section, or for all of them they've started offering this? I'm always tempted by these nice marble shaders. So maybe we can do latest. Oof. Oof. Oh, I need to clear out my search query. All right. So you think the marble one would have it? Vegan nuts, good to see you. What do we have here? Some leathers, some wire frames. The wood stuff is quite nice. Let's just grab this kind of wood. Maybe just the 4K for a quicker download. And just extract it. So I believe the difference between the A and the C is just like ASCII. With the A, you should be able to literally open it up and inspect it with a text editor like this. So you can see this is actually telling you the shader node, like it's explaining basically a node network inside of Houdini. And we can grab that with this reference. So this you can use to reference any kind of external information. We'll do let me just copy this. Bing, bing, bing. Bing, bing, bing. And then we have the wood. Ambient CG better than Quixel. Ambient CG, it's just different variation, I would say. The licensing and business model and stuff is slightly different. So it's nice to have open source textures and stuff that, especially for teaching or streaming or that kind of stuff, you can redistribute and publicly access, more of like a library. And then Quixel is more of like a subscription business model or something like that. So similar, I don't know, like Netflix and the library maybe is a kind of way to explain it. So we can see we're getting the material and we have our mesh. Instead of putting this primitive path here with the expression, usually I'm putting my materials like that. So primitive path basically means where you're going to be putting everything. And I think I want to copy that expression. And then this way I'll have my materials and then the wood one. So if I keep putting more materials in, you can do it like that. You get more specific. So all these are, so the slashes is like you're making directories. So this could be all of my wood materials. You could have metal materials if you're doing like architectural visualization, that could be handy. And then you're just you're able to work with large data sets really efficiently. So you could grab everything with wood textures assigned to them, make a color correction on that, like make everything else invisible, or just do kind of changes that traditionally in any 3D software you would have had to work with, like render layers, or like done very tedious things or written scripts. And then this kind of stuff you're able to just be more organized. So that's one advantage of everything. But we haven't assigned the material yet. So we're just sat here looking at a gray ball. Yeah, so the USD should resolve the paths. I haven't looked too deeply into it, but there's some more advanced things. I think on the CG Wiki, Matt Estella's website, he mentioned something about kind of doing some code in USD to hotlink stuff to like a relative to HIP file, but the USD stuff, the way it's set up, that was like for storing it back on disk when he was saying that. So we should just be able to do assign material now. And usually I get rid of that and I'll just start with all geometry primitives or all geometric primitives. And then material path, you have a few options here. You can just drag from the scene graph tree like that. You can also click here and you'll see kind of like a Maya outliner type of thing. And then we're just in the Hydra, or the Houdini GL Hydra delegate. So if we switch from Houdini GL to one of the more advanced rendering engines, we should see better shading results and better like texture processing and that kind of stuff. So now you can see the specular highlights are a little bit nicer. And I could press D, maybe switch to the XPU. Depending how these shaders are set up, it might work. Some features are still being implemented with XPU, so it might not be 100%, but we can give it a try. So we can put down a dome light and just start to make ourselves a little kind of look dev setup. You can see here the lights are already set up the way that I was setting up materials. So it puts them under like a materials section. I'm just going to get rid of that wood folder and go back to materials like that. See a lot of setups using the light mixer node. Yeah, the light mixer should be pretty handy. Just mix like editing or adjusting lights. Yeah, I think you can use the property. This one here is, or that might just be like light edit. So being able to branch out and maybe have one render chain or one, this would kind of be like a render layer, or like in Houdini they would always call them takes up here, but nobody really used them because they were super not procedural. Like it was a lot of drop down menus and clicking. But this way you can just visualize if you wanted this light to be half the intensity, I could set it to that. And then when I'm just looking through this viewer, the light should go half as intense. I think I just need to be a little bit more specific with my primitive selection up there. So if I just say all light primitives, yeah, light mixer as well, it will do similar things. To me, I was a bigger fan of the light edit, but I do see quite a bit of people using the light mixer. I think that this is like a Python or PyQt interface or something like that. You might have to make a collection before it will show up over there. But yeah, this should be another way to edit some of that stuff as well. I'm not a big fan of these Python panels and that kind of stuff, so I tend to stick to just these Houdini user interface things because it's easier to drive them with expressions and link channels and things of that nature. So generally, I'm not a big fan of the Python UI panels. It's kind of just an old curmudgeon type of thing, maybe. But in terms of user interface things for the average kind of lighter, I could see it being pretty nice to have a mixer for all the things. I think as well you can do some things under the Solaris. You can get a light mixer here, maybe. Maybe you need to use the node. I'm not super advanced with lighting, so I don't know all the ins and outs. Max Espio? Max Espio? Good afternoon. Gaba Kodesh. Sadaj. So put a grid in, and we basically just have a simple look dev scene. I can also switch this. Deeds, thank you for the 7 months. I appreciate it. And we'll put in a texture. MaterialX still needs to catch up to RS. I don't know, it's kind of, I mean, to me, Redshift hopefully will support the MaterialX stuff. And MaterialX is also just kind of a framework, like you can put any shading nodes inside of the MaterialX file format. But to me, it's just that the standard surface model of MaterialX, it just needs maybe to get a little bit better and also become more standardized across other platforms. But basically, if you look at the Autodesk this standard surface, I believe this is what's implemented in MaterialX as the standard surface. And they go into the theory and the settings and everything, and there's tons of documentation and stuff like that on it. So I mean, just for getting a good standard surface that's behaving well and quickly, and you can do some layered stuff, that's, if it behaves the same with other renders, that would be ideal to me. Obviously, there's more advanced things, like in the subsurface, you'd want to see some extra features and some stuff like that. But overall, if it's like, if this shader works with 90% of the things, and then I need to do extra work for like 1 or 2 things to specialize it for a render that I'm using, like, I don't mind that. But generally, you just have like a set or a environment, and if all the shaders and settings generally carry over for that, you're in good shape. And then you have some hero characters or hero objects, and if you need to do extra specialization for them, it's not a big deal. Khalil Kira, how's it going? So the light, we have a basic grid, and I think we're good to keep going. I'm just going to clean this up a little bit. And one thing we can do, if we go back to assign material here, instead of putting it on everything, like I said earlier, you can use the calibration mesh or the preview mesh. Preview mesh is generally meant to be holding the actual material that you're kind of like inspecting. And then calibration mesh you can kind of do whatever you want with it. There's some standard like color rings people put on it sometimes, or people just set it to like a 50% gray, 100% white, something like that, just to balance. Or you basically have a standard between renders. So if I switch wood materials, I'll always have something here that's responding the same to my light in the middle. So yeah, that's pretty nice. You can also do more advanced, this is kind of like the group syntax in Houdini. If I do asterisk / preview mesh, this would get any preview mesh. So if I did do a duplicate up here and wanted like a few of these, just move it over. Let's go over 2 units. I think in this case we just want to do the geometries. Then we have 2 materials that we could do that way. And then if I go back here to just what I had done with the drag and drop, you would see that this allows, oh, I did the wrong one. So we're going to do the preview mesh. So basically this allows more specificity. You can clearly point to one specific mesh, or you can do it like that, and you can get all of the things ending in preview mesh. Alkama, good to see you. Hope you're having a good Sunday. So that's some fancy things, or just nice that you can work quickly and try out instant kind of detail or variations. As traditionally in Houdini, to make a modification, set up instancing and duplicate things, it would be more there's just a lot of drop downs, and it's not just a single node that you can drop in. So that's another USD bonus. So now if we want to make some more changes to the material, like we're loading the definition from disk. Oh no. Oh no, my windows are all messed up. So you're loading the definitions there from disk. We can't really edit it because it's just that text file that we're looking at on disk. One thing we can do though is kind of localize or like instantiate all of this code that's happening here. It's just an XML file into our scene. So if we just use this under materials, edit, I believe it's material network. Again, you can either just drag it like that, or you can you should be able to use the drop down menu. And then if you hit load, basically when I click load right there, what that's doing is it's internally making a node representation of this text file. So yeah, this is really useful if you need to make additional edits or customizations to the shader. For example, the diffuse color, if you're not 100% happy with it, you could use the MaterialX color correct, put that in, and maybe adjust the hue. I think if we go like negative a little bit, we can get it a little bit more red. More of like a cherry wood or cherry colored or something like that. We might want to reduce the gamma a little bit. And now we have maybe something that's like a little bit, maybe I need to just play around with these inputs. So something that's a little bit more saturated or just like a typical edit a little lighter might have to make, or a look dev artist might have to make to a shader. Maybe those bypass flags don't play super well with MaterialX. So it's like a newer thing. But yeah, this is really cool. Like, to me, this is almost the dream workflow. They're almost there. Just other renders being a little bit better with supporting it, but overall it's super nice. So that's one thing we can do that's pretty useful. And another thing you can do if you don't want to take the time to graph the whole material, if you do use this, might be material variation. I believe it's material variation. So I think, again, we're going to want to grab this wood material. And then you're going to want to get another viewer over here. I think if you do details, this will basically allow you to view the aspects of the shader that you could manipulate. So I think these shaders, it doesn't look like they're set up in a way that they've exposed other properties, but you can sometimes like do a color correction on top of the texture channel. You could do some other like this is kind of like shader overrides or stuff like that. So instead of taking the time to actually edit the whole material, you could, if it is set up, I think, because this isn't set up with like any inputs or inside of a sub network, a lot of that stuff is kind of locked off. But so other shaders I've worked with, they're set up in that way, so you have more flexibility like that. Dragging individual PNGs onto an RS material. It's hard for me to say if it's worth spending more time either way. I mean, this is, it depends just on a lot of different aspects of like the turnaround time you have for the work, your individual resources. There's just several things. I mean, this clearly is more geared for working with bigger teams. So someone like the lead look dev artist could be managing this MaterialX file for your assets and publishing or updating the file. And then for specific shots, if it needs to happen, you could graph it and edit it like this. So you have a lot more power if you're working with bigger teams. You can more efficiently manage and manipulate materials over many shots and shows and things like that, and have like show specific variants, show specific edits, shot specific edits, like get very granular with that information when you need to, but then hopefully make like global edits more quickly if you need to. So there's a little bit more like setup and learning time, I would say, to put into this, but for bigger projects and bigger teams and all that stuff, it will definitely pay off. And then just like going back into old scene files, it makes that stuff a lot more reusable, and will in the future just continue to save you work. All right, so we did that. We got this one in. We could do another reference, and I think with this one, instead of the USDA that we downloaded, I'm just going to grab one that's inside of that same $HFS folder. So this is the Houdini install directory. we go to Houdini, MaterialX. They hid it from me this time. And then this time we just do materials, examples, standard surface. I think we just need to switch that to an asterisk. Then you can see that these are some MTLX files. It's like similar to the USDA file. Either of them can hold MaterialX definitions. And I'm gonna get maybe the marble from here. And we should be able to pull this up. You can see it's kind of nested the node a little bit more deep than I would like here. So instead of automatically choose the primitive to reference, we could do specific primitive. And then when I click through this menu here, if I just grab the marble material, now we have materials all sitting together at the main level of this materials kind of folder. So that's just another organizational thing that I'll usually do. I think you might not need this final text there. Maybe you need the other slash at least. Or maybe you need the whole thing. But generally I'm trying to stay as organized as possible when I'm working with this kind of stuff. And then down here in the assign material, we could just switch to the marble. And this should update like that. This might be a little bit slow just because of the subsurface stuff. Is there a good equivalent for spread on the area or rect lights? I'm not too sure. I've tried that a little bit, but I don't think that they've implemented something that's always going to be the same necessarily. If you're used to using the spread, you can do it with the Redshift specific properties over here. But in terms of a general standard light kind of implementation, USD doesn't support too many advanced features just because I think they're trying to keep like the baseline expectations or whatever the same. So yeah, with this marble shader we just put in, we could take a look if we go back to the scene graph details, and then you could see if we wanted to maybe change the base color or the base brightness. We can change that. We could change the subsurface amount if this feels like too much. And it seems like those are the only parameters that they've exposed with it. But let's just do a quick look at this material. Maybe to edit material properties. Let's try grabbing this. So this should allow you to manipulate specific properties. If you wanted to add like a tint, you could do, where was the subsurface? So you try turning that off. That seems to speed stuff up. Never got along with the light size shadow softness workflow. Yeah, I think just in general, you can't do as advanced lighting setups. Maybe you could build barn doors in or something like that with geometry. But if I'm using USD and still trying to do that stuff, I would go over to the Redshift or Arnold tab and do this spread specific stuff. And then even between renderers like that, those settings or those amounts don't seem to map over reliably. So I think that's why USD didn't include them yet, because each renderer has such specific implementations of it. They didn't want it to mess everyone up. So we could do something like this. We could try the base color. I'm not sure if these will work because they weren't highlighted when I did this. They might not be connected like to the shader, if that makes sense. I have a feeling that they're kind of not wired in, but it's just adding the standard material settings when I click that button. So I'll just get rid of that one. And what I wanted to do now is something a little bit more advanced. So I'm just going to save this where we are right now and let's put it in the stream. I'll just name it something like that. And if you want to play around with it on your end, you can grab it. But yeah, I wanted to play around with mixing or blending between different surfaces, different shaders using USD. So try to do that somewhat quickly, and that's probably what we'll wrap up with. So maybe just start with here. I think that I thought they had another marble material somewhere in here. Maybe not. Yeah, I don't see it. So let's just move ahead with this edit material. And this time I'll just grab the marble from there again, and then build the shading network inside of here. Then it does look like they have a good amount of these exposed. It's supposed to be doing some fancy stuff with that noise. But maybe I'll just have to go in and start ripping it apart. All right, let's try to make a camera. And we have a camera. This should give us something a little bit better to kind of look from. just a longer lens and something that's a little bit more of like a straight on view. Okay. Oof. So that's what I meant when I was talking about mangling it earlier. So I'm just killing most of those parameters, and we can just try to kind of go from these settings down here. So if you're doing more of just like kind of trying to set up a material, sometimes it's nicer just to work with this instead of trying to manage a bunch of other nodes and stuff like that. It's just like less clicking around to have one parameter interface that's responsible for all the settings. I think the MaterialX subsurface isn't the best subsurface. Like, I know Redshift recently implemented that random walk scattering or something like that. But just in terms of a subsurface, it's something that should basically give you a good starting point. Ooh. All right, so we have a little bit of color attenuation or something like that happening. It should be pretty good where everything else is at with it. If you want to, you could try this NG Marble 1 subgraph or subnetwork. So I think what they're trying to do with this is to use the Perlin noise to do some kind of vein type of stuff. We can try putting it into the base color. Maybe the subsurface needs to be yeah, it seemed like it was definitely overriding diffuse, but I'm not sure why it's still not really showing up. Oof, that might be why. All right. So yeah, I think that setting there was getting messed up or something like that. Yeah, I'm not sure what's going on. I'd opened these up on a different computer and they were working better. But this is really going to be a hatchet job that we have here. So yeah, usually after the sign to do that, people will usually do the absolute value and then you get like the marble type of veins or structures or whatever like that. But yeah, I don't know, I think something is still between Solaris, like USD and all that, they're still dialing in these standards and how like each thing will kind of properly or correctly implement them. So there's definitely still some rough edges or growing pains or something like that. All right. So we have something here that maybe is kind of like a marble, and then I'm guessing what they were meaning to do with it was have it drive the subsurface amount, maybe? We could do color. And then we have some of the marble kind of veins and that kind of stuff. So yeah, sorry to deviate, get sidetracked with that. But basically, if you want to actually start customizing or debugging materials, building out the graph like this with the edit material thing is a handy way to be able to work. And we might want that stuff to be more subtle. And then if we want to mix materials, I'm just going to work with, as a starting point, we can do from the geometry property value. I'm just going to get position, because we know that this is just in the middle of the world or the origin. So I can do the MaterialX separate vector, and then we should have some kind of XYZ object space coordinates for our Shaderball. Pretty cool. We can do another standard MaterialX surface. And both of these are putting as an output type the surface kind of wiring style, and we're going to end up with a single MaterialX surface, but we can actually mix them using this MaterialX mix. And then signature, you can see it supports many things, even surface shader. And then I think if we just plug it in, automatically it will detect what's going on. So if I set this mix to X and the other one to the other standard surface, then we should have a left to right or right to left blend of two different surface models, or shaders basically. And we could maybe, if we really want to visualize this, let's go to red, and then you can see the blend stuff here that's happening that's pretty interesting. Maybe not just a right to left one is super nice, and we can also do MaterialX remap, might be range remap. And this way you can clamp that area in to be a little bit more specific. So instead of a broad gradient, we're doing just a more harsh or contrasted kind of selection. Daniel Stroyev, thank you for the tier 1. Let's go. So this way we're getting a little bit clearly defined, kind of keep actually splitting it exactly in half. But yeah, this should give us something right down the middle. It's possible somewhere something got moved over. Or maybe this model doesn't start like right at the origin. So I think it's maybe a little bit offset. So we can try moving it back. But yeah, I was gonna actually try some other stuff out as well. So instead of working just with the I think it's because I'm in like negative numbers or whatever. So if I set this between 0 and 0.1, and then to actually get a nice gradient, I think we would want like -1 and 1, and then that would be like a little bit more broad. So I was just forgetting about the negative numbers. So yeah, we can do something like that if we just want like a very linear or graphic transition. It's still cool. You can do any kind of material you're thinking of. If you crank up this IOR, you can get something almost like a chrome ball or even a mirror. So you can definitely get some interesting blends or combinations of materials this way. Let's see what happens if we go maybe somewhere, something like a gold. Some kind of metal, something close to a gold. So yeah, we'll keep it like that, and we also have with MaterialX under texture procedural 3D, we have some different noises. So this is another thing that I think is pretty interesting, is that you can basically use these to generate 3D noise patterns, and then they should behave like the same across other rendering platforms even. So you don't have to worry about learning the noise patterns for each specific renderer for kind of rudimentary or basic styles of noises. You should be able to just kind of set some of this stuff up just in one place, and you would have you should have somewhat respectable settings. I might grab all this stuff and put it in a different node network, because I'm getting some weird, somewhat weird results right there. I don't know if it's because these values aren't clamped. I think that was the case. So maybe this function, you need to be careful that it's not clamping the results that it's giving you. Yeah, so there's different noises that they'll give you. This fractal one is nice for kind of more organic looking things, I would say. If you increase the diminish and maybe the lacunarity, then you should start to be able to get some stuff like there's some gold flakes or something like that kind of going on. You might want even more, as many octaves as you can. I don't know. I'm always too greedy for some of that detail. But yeah, in that way you can start to add more complex materials and really start to have like complex, interesting results. You can even use other aspects. So we were doing position at the start, but you could even read geometry attributes. So like similar to Redshift, if you were doing RS point attribute, you could grab some transition attribute and do some interesting stuff with that for sure. Which I think is pretty interesting or pretty promising. Basically, you could even have some advanced procedural materials. None of this is based on texture coordinates. So I can apply this to any organic geometry that I would be modeling inside of SOPs, or any geometry that I'm importing, and get a pretty realistic or somewhat photorealistic lighting response to everything. That's pretty cool. So let's rotate the light, just get something that's a little bit more rim lit, just a little bit more interesting or better to look at. You can save this as another file, and we could give it a try with Redshift. See if I'm crashing my scene, or see what happens. We can also try it with Karma XPU or something like that. But yeah, I think in hopefully the near future, basically, so yeah, I think Redshift isn't fully supporting MaterialX yet. I did see it on their, they have the Trello roadmap, I think, or they might be using another, forget the name of the service they're using, but it's definitely on their roadmap, the developer's roadmap of things to support for Redshift. So hopefully, like in the near future, we'll be able to work in just a more standardized way. So if you are doing a job and they don't have enough money to pay for Redshift licenses or something like that, you're still able to reuse materials, but maybe you just don't have as much control as you want, or there's many reasons why you would be switching renders or using other ones. But we should be able to go into the XPU and get, oof. Oh no. So yeah, I'm not sure what we were using that XPU wasn't supporting. It might be, yeah, it might be this framework that we're inside of. So I'm just going to copy those nodes and we could just try a new assigned material network maybe. Let's put this back to the preview mesh. Oop, getting the wrong one. All right, preview mesh. And we actually want the material library. And I'm gonna do the, I think if you do Karma MaterialX, you can do, you should be able to do MaterialX subnetwork as well. And both of those should be supported with Karma, or with Karma XPU. So you can get rid of that, and just paste what I took from the other material in, and we can graph it, and then we can take preview mesh, and we want to assign this to any preview meshes. Fingers crossed. Still working on something, maybe? So if you want to go into some debugging, I think, well, let's first just try restart render. So if we grab the preview mesh here, if you want to get in some debugging, we can go now to scene graph details and verify that we're actually binding or assigning that material to it. One thing that might not be it's possible that this standard surface is like an older surface type that isn't being supported. See what happens here. They also have the Karma XPU page that would go into more detail of what would be supported and what wouldn't be supported. It's possible the mixing isn't supported yet. Oof. Oof. So yeah, I think maybe material mixing isn't supported yet with XPU. So that's an unfortunate one. But yeah, like I was saying, all this stuff, hopefully sooner rather than later. I think that all this stuff developers are actively working on patching and supporting, and just debugging and stuff like that. Yeah, it's only one shader at a time for XPU. Don't get it too confused with multiple shaders. What would be the easiest way to make a USD file similar to how that does? So yeah, all this stuff, if you right click and do save, you can do MaterialX. So I could just put this in the temporary directory and save this as like test MaterialX. This was the one we downloaded here. You can kind of see how it's structured. And then I can pull up that test MaterialX, and looks like it didn't get everything. So we might need to put this inside of another subnetwork, like I was starting to do when I was debugging everything. So I think if we put this in the MaterialX subnet, I still have that on my clipboard, so I can paste it in. This way, this is their intended workflow for doing that kind of stuff. It's possible I'm missing a step, but that was their intended way. Maybe highlight everything here. Bing, bing, bing. There. I don't know if it's getting everything 100%. It might be another thing that they're working on. But to my understanding, that's how it's intended to be working with. Zach, good to see you. Would any JPEG textures used need to be bundled up manually and sent? I don't believe that's the case. Depends what you're working with, I would say. So, to my knowledge, if you're doing everything through USD, you can do a USD file, and then you can do this USD zip that's intended to basically put everything into a single archive or a compressed kind of file format. But you need to go to USD first, and then you need to go into ROP context or the out context that has that USD zip node supported. And then basically you take your USD file and you create a USD zip, and that will look through the USD file and encapsulate or localize all those references. But I haven't tried it 100% myself, but yeah, so basically with web applications and stuff like that, the usdz file format is a slightly different thing. I think you can even do from the command line. Maybe there's just not a manual entry for it. But side effects ships with this application, so if you don't want to use the RUP like that, you can use this command line application as well that basically does the same thing that I was explaining. So we'll take, I think it's just trying to run it. Andre, good to see you. So yeah, I think somewhere they explain the structure of things. Can even put MP3s, wave files. You can get some funky beats going in your USDZ files. But yeah, this is meant to be the end target for VR purposes or web-based purposes, is my understanding of it. And I think that Apple is a big developer or big contributor to it, for all this business that you do with the phone and all that. Like, this would be a USDZ scene, and using the tracker or the anchor or whatever, it will just plop the USDZ scene on that. So if you're a developer for mobile, you're just making one USDZ scene, and then the hardware is like interpreting that. Funny business or whatever. The Pixar website is a good source of info. Some of it's a little bit in-depth. This side effects stuff I was talking about earlier today. So mainly when I was just focused so much on MaterialX, this portion here is definitely useful. I find it useful. And then I've been going through some of the SIGGRAPH talks and the different presentations and stuff like that people have been giving. But basically all this stuff is super new. It's still, some of the stuff hasn't been like finalized or standardized, and to me, the more it becomes adopted and standardized or supported, our lives will be easier. Just because you're able, I was showing something on Twitter earlier today. So I was doing a similar thing with that, loading stuff from disk, and in this one, I had a directory that had MaterialX files, and just a bunch of cylinders, and then just with a Python script to basically find all the materials in the directory, you could randomly then assign them to instances. So if you're maintaining like a nice, you could spend a week or a weekend and do some look dev like this, pump out some nice materials. Maybe they don't need UVs like this one, and they just have procedural texturing coordinates or things like that. You can get a fun set of 10 or 20 different materials, and just being able to kind of pump through work more quickly or produce more work more quickly, and just reuse things that you've done. In that sense, that's where this power of MaterialX lies. So it's never going to be 100% like customizable into the full bleeding edge capabilities of like what people are doing with render engines. It's a little bit more generic or more general purpose, kind of like for architectural purposes, like super useful. If you're getting even more advanced, you could find just like based off of the naming of mesh names in the outliner or in the hierarchy, you could say like if anything has the word wood in it, I'm going to just start with a somewhat standard wood material. So in theory, you could shade really big buildings or complex assets, and to have something started with ready to go more quickly than, I don't know, I mean, that kind of stuff could take days or weeks just setting up with a new asset. Traditionally in older software, because like merging, getting materials from another, even if you're using the same scene, like to get materials from one Maya file to another file, maybe you need scripts for that, or it was never that easy. With side effects, we could copy and paste, but you'd still have to manually go and find the scene and do some stuff like that. So that was always just a big roadblock. And I mean, this way, theoretically, you'd be able to do some destruction simulation. You could give it to an artist that's working in Cinema 4D to light, and do like cinematography. Once Cinema gets its USD implementation and whatever, if they're using Octane, or hopefully they're using something that supports USD, but basically just collaborating, like it should make all of that stuff easier. There's definitely still some kind of hoops or glitches, caveats or stuff like that. But yeah, I think, I don't know, I mean, it's hard for me to estimate how soon it would become the standard. And I mean, some of that's even just on all of us to kind of push for it to become adopted. Like the standards are here, the renderers are starting to pick it up, and the artists, if we want to use it, it's kind of on our responsibility now to start asking people to use it. Like even with a Limbic, there was a slow pickup. People wanted to stick with OBJ or FBX files, and I would have to kind of tell them like, no, it's going to use less data. We can just do a Limbic. With the VDB, there was similar kind of growing pains, or took some time for other 3D packages to adopt VDB, but now you can transport volumes more easily between other software packages. So just being able to even start moving a camera, starting with a material and starting with some lights, instead of a lighter having to recreate that, or they're basically already hitting the ground running, or they have the information that you gave them to get started with. So it should make everyone's life easier and just make collaboration and keeping everyone kind of on the same page with asset management more easy. So yeah, if you want to play around with this material mixing stuff, you can grab that scene file. And yeah, I think this will be it for the